everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today, we were talking to Pia Orlene, and we're talking about her book, Sacred Retreat, using natural cycles to recharge your life. So, welcome, Pia.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So, tell me a little bit about your book and how you came about even the thought of writing this book. What prompted you?
What prompted me was talking to some Indigenous elders about their natural cycles and the way they treat them and how they consider them sacred and holy, and how they used to have retreat times where all the women gathered together and created things together and talked together and slept in the same space and had a sacred time of retreat away from household chores, away from childcare, away from everything. And that they discovered that when they treated their sacred cycles this way, they had more intuition, they had better relationships, they had more creativity and more dream guidance. And I thought that sounded pretty cool. So I started the practice myself. And in finding out myself, trying it out, I found out that all of those things were also true in my own life. So I decided to do a scientific study. And I did a statistically significant study, meaning that the results turned out to be less than 5% related to chance. That when a woman goes into retreat during her menstrual cycle, away from her regular duties and away from sleeping with her partner, that she does, in fact, have increased creativity, increased dream guidance, increased intuition, and better relationship harmony.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I started the book.
And so when you said that you did statistical analysis, so you said dream guidance, creativity, and then what was the last one that you were looking at?
Intuition and relationship harmony.
Ah, okay. Intuition, and those are, and then how did you measure that? Was it based on a subjective scale of like, how are you feeling? Do you have more?
I had a triangulated study where I used three different resources. I had a questionnaire that I asked each of the women, and I had a diary or a journal that they kept and wrote their own comments in and that I read. And then I did interviews with the women, and it took all three types of information pulled together to get really clear results of what was going on. And just for fun, at the end of the study, I interviewed all their husbands or partners who verified that absolutely the relationship got better when they did this practice.
Wow, that's interesting. So tell me, for folks that aren't familiar, so you tell me about the woman that you spoke with, what different cultures they came from, and what they did during. And when we talk about cycles, you're talking about, because I've talked about a lot of people, they talk about cycles of nature, cycles of life. This is specifically about menstrual cycle, but clearly it relates to the other cycles of life. But is
Yes.
that right? Yeah, just for clarification.
Well, they're all connected. But the book is not just about menstrual cycles. It does use that particular original research as a basis for understanding cycles and how they're important to us. But the book basically talks about cycles for all of us and in harmony with cycles of nature and how we've become unbalanced as a society and in our relationships because we're not honoring our natural cycles.
And it's not just for women, it's for women and men, correct?
Yes, for women and men. Yes.
Okay. And so tell me for the specific things when you talk to the indigenous women, what did they do? And what was the practices that they were doing during their menstrual cycle? And what were the men doing during the menstrual cycle? Because it wasn't just the women, it's the women and the men that were doing specific rituals during that time.
Well, the women would retreat on their own, away from any household duties, any chores, any childcare, and they would take their arts and crafts, and they would sit and do creative things, and they would have their dreams and talk about their dreams, and they would solve problems for the tribes and come back together after the time of their bleeding and have new ideas for the whole community. The men have a similar thing. Men call it either a vision quest, where they do a sweat lodge when they are in certain tribes, and other tribes do what's called a plunge, where they go into the water to clear themselves out and bring in new inspiration. But the indigenous tribes all over the world all have times for retreat, both for men and for women.
Mm-hmm.
And what they understand about the retreat is that it's necessary to harmonize themselves with nature, with each other, with everything that's important.
So really that was it. So what was the intention? So when I mean, what was the ideology aside from harmonizing with nature and like how did they view the cycle of a period? And like what was the viewpoint of menstrual and menstruating for the indigenous cultures?
Great question, CJ. There's a ton of research in my book that refers to stories from cultures all over the world. But basically, all indigenous cultures consider the menstrual cycle to be a special time of guidance and
Mm,
intuitive connection. And many, many of the tribes rely on, they consider it a sacred ceremony. When a woman is having her cycle, she is in ceremony. Just
mhm,
like when a man is in a sweat lodge, she's in ceremony. And many of the tribes rely on the wisdom that the women gain when they are retreating during their sacred ceremonies to bring back news for the tribe, creative ideas for places they've had problems or situations that are not resolved, or just new ideas of things that would bring better harmony.
mm.
So it is seen as a ceremony that's important for the entire tribe.
And so, I mean, I know that what happens technically, and I don't even know, I should probably have been listening more to my sex education class, but during menstruation, what happens is that your uterus is like, it's basically, if you don't get pregnant, then basically your uterus lining sheds, and then that's what causes your menstruation. Is that right? So, I think
That's
that's
half of
technical.
it. The other half is the hormonal switch that goes during the different half of the cycle because you have different hormones that switch, whether you're preparing for a child or whether you're releasing the lining of the womb. But the most important thing that I learned is that this shedding is not just about shedding menstrual blood. It's not just physical biological cleanse. It's also a time for cleansing out stale arguments, old emotional issues, problems that you haven't been able to resolve. It's a time for cleansing on all levels, and that's
Mm,
why it was so special and important to the indigenous people.
mm. So then, intentionally, when they went off to retreat and they left their worldly duties, and then they're thinking, this is a way for me to cleanse all toxic ideas, thoughts, beliefs,
Yes.
relationships that don't serve me. So they kind of walked in with like, oh, I don't know. I'm trying to imagine if they walk in with like a whole laundry list of things like, okay, now it's time for me. I
I
got my
don't think
period.
I don't think they walk in with it. I think what happens naturally with women is that when our hormones stop to switch and we are about to approach the time of having that menstrual cleanse, all of a sudden our emotional issues come to the top. We get more weepy, we get angrier. That's been diagnosed as PMS for years and years and years, but I think that's wrong. I don't think there should be a medical diagnosis of PMS because a woman's more emotional. I think what happens is the emotionals come up to give a woman guidance of what needs she needs to look at, what needs to change in her life. So it's not that, oh, I have my period, so I'm going to cry now, or I get to be angry now. It's, oh, I have a time now to look at what's not working in my life and use
Oh.
this emotion
Okay,
to
so
straighten it out.
as I'm understanding this, like the hormones are helping elevate whatever emotional stuff that's unresolved. So if you have anything unresolved, it kind of peaks up to the top, and then that's like, oh, now I have some good stuff to work on when I go on my retreat to figure out what that all that stuff is that's coming up.
Got it. That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so um, so I have a couple of questions that have come in since we've been talking about. So, does this work for people in the States? So, when you did this market research, you had said that I assume you were surveying people in the U.S. or in other. Who were you surveying when you did the research?
I took a sample from people all over the world. Anyone who wanted to participate in the study had to meet certain criteria. The first criteria was that they had to have a space that they could create as their own sacred space and feel like they could decorate it or make it comfortable or bring in candles or whatever they needed to make it their space, away from any distractions from other family members.
Mm,
The second criteria was that their partner had to be supportive of this investigative study and say, yes, I support you doing this. Because no study is going to be clear and pure if you've got antagonism coming that your partner's doing it.
right.
So the partners had to support it. The third criteria that I set out was that no woman could have PMS, and I meant clinical medically diagnosed PMS. But what I found out by putting that criteria out there is that every single woman I interviewed believed that she had PMS
Hmm.
because they were viewing their natural emotions or their breast tenderness or bloating, all of those things as being something wrong, something out of
Mm,
balance, when
mm,
actually it's the body's natural change. So we sort of waived that one, and I eliminated anybody who had classical PMS from a medical standpoint. And
What's
if it was,
classical PMS from a medical standpoint? I don't even know what it is because I guess I have the same misunderstanding.
it's pretty often misunderstood, but it's diagnosed in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychologists as aberrant behavior that is above and beyond the norm, extreme rages, extreme depression that can't be alleviated, that starts right before the cycle and it goes all the way through the cycle. And it's clinically documented as being a severe imbalance, not just getting a little weepy or mad at your partner or a little breast tenderness or bloating. It's an actual physiological extreme imbalance.
Okay, so these gals who you had, these women who you had go through this, and I assume they're from all different age ranges, is that right? So did they have to be menstruating to be on the
Yes,
group
they
in the
did
group?
have to actually be. They actually had to be in the menstrual cycle phase of their lives in order to participate. But that's interesting because my book offers a whole chapter about how women with menopause can understand and appreciate cycles within their own life, even though they've already gone through the change.
Yeah, and I
So
do want to
there's
talk
ways.
about that for sure. Okay, so but I want to go back to the women so that these women actually went through the same rituals that the indigenous women went through, which means that they retreated from their normal daily activities and during a menstrual cycle, which I think probably lasts between 7, 9 days. I don't know how long normally a menstrual cycle usually lasts.
Usually between 4 to 7 days.
Okay, 4 to 7 days they would retreat, and during that time they would use that retreat period to be closed off in a special room completely devoted to themselves, and that felt like a retreat space. And they would like what would they do when they went off and retreated?
Well, the retreat and the study was only the sleeping separately. They could go about their lives in a daily way
Okay,
because many of them had jobs or children to care for, and it was a bit extreme to ask them to drop everything for a
right.
full menstrual cycle. So the retreat, just by having them sleep separately, showed significant difference. So that
Wow.
indicates that if we were to do a full retreat and really go away for the entire time, the benefits would be even larger.
Wow, that's interesting. So it was just the sleep part. It wasn't like journaling and creative endeavors or dreaming or all those kind of things. It was just
Well,
sleeping in a different bed.
they would go into their room in time to journal and time to write down things, and they'd wake up in the morning with creative ideas. So they did have space and time for themselves around the sleeping, but then they'd get up and do whatever they chose to do during the major part of the day.
Interesting. Wow.
One really interesting One really interesting thing to me is I had a baseline on this study. It was a 7 month long study.
Hmm.
And the month before and the month after, I had the women sleeping in the bed with their partners as usual. And at the end of the study, one of the women said when she went back to her marital bed, she was stung by a wasp. And she took that as a sign from nature that that was not what she was supposed to be
Wow.
doing.
Wow. Okay, so the idea was that somehow these indigenous folks kind of knew more than we did. That they understood this cycle that women were going through was kind of a special thing, and that it was a time for kind of creativity, which is interesting because if you think about what's happening, it's because you haven't had a baby, right? That you haven't necessarily been impregnated, that your uterine lining shed. So I guess there's this kind of pent up creativity that the woman has. I assume is that like what was when you talk to the Native American? Yeah, is that what they said happens? Like was there a logic to this practice when you talk to folks?
When you're talking to an indigenous person, they will automatically say that spirit gave them new ideas because
Oh,
that's indoctrinated in the whole way that they see the world is that everything is connected to source or spirit or grandmother moon or however they want to refer to that source outside of themselves that is connected to them that gives them their guidance. So they would see that by taking the time to honor their sacred ceremony, they were rewarded by grandmother moon or spirit with new creative ideas.
interesting. Wow, that's interesting. So there are a whole bunch of these fascinating stories that I was wondering if you could share. I have a few of them marked out in the book. So one was you were talking. Okay, so you've mentioned this already. So you on page 75, you talk about meeting with someone. I can't remember. You talked to someone who, Blackfoot woman in Canada. Okay, and you were talking to her just to kind of trigger your memory, and you said that, here's what you said. The rituals taught and practiced by the women and the stories of men respect for the power of women's bleeding. She graciously explained that the time of the flow was the same as the vision. It was the same as the vision quest for men, a time of purification, a time of seeking, and a time of listening to the spirits for guidance. She told me that if one listened, one could get answers not only for one's life, but also for the whole tribe. Both men's vision quest and women's retreat during menstruation were considered sacred rituals where each gender separated themselves in order to better purify what was out of balance and to better hear what was needed and to return to harmony, both in their own lives and in the lives of others for whom they prayed. So the women would have their menstrual cycles, and then because they're separate from the men would then have their vision quests. Is that what you meant when you said the men would have vision quests, or is that something separate and distinct?
It's separate. It's separate. The men did vision quests whenever they felt they were called to do a vision quest. And generally that comes up when somebody's having a problem or they need an answer to a question. So they would call. Vision quest is about going to seek an answer, going to try to find an answer to a problem. They also had sweat lodges where they would come together just to ask for guidance. So two different things were going on. The vision quest to seek a specific purpose to a specific question, or a sweat lodge where they want to do a purification and they want to see what guidance comes in. But they weren't governed by doing it simultaneously when the women were doing it. They chose their own timing to do it. So
Okay.
I think the way it is the women would do their cycles when it was their time, and women in tribal situations often bleed together. So there's no, I have my cycle, then you have your cycle. They somehow miraculously bleed together when they're in community. So I think the women would go off and have their cycles, and then when they came back out, something would come up in the tribe, and the men would decide we need a sweat lodge or we need to go on a vision quest.
So
So I think it's more related.
I'm sorry, say that again. You think it was what?
Yes, I think it's more related to each gender listening to their own guidance about timing.
Right, where women were lucky enough to be prompted by their period, right? It was like a physical, like, okay, it's time for you to go over there and like sit in the retreat. So, so when you were talking to these women, did they think it was like what when you these are indigenous women who are from who still live in a tribal culture, or are they just telling you about like long time ago we did this, or are they still doing this ritual?
It varies from tribe to tribe. The Cherokee women still practice, many of them.
Hmm.
The Cree women still practice, many of them. The Crow women had forgotten about it completely. A young woman that I spoke to didn't have any idea. She said, we hear stories about that, but nobody does that anymore.
Hmm.
The Blackfoot still do it, but it varies from tribe to tribe. Many of the Cree people said we can't do it together in tribal situations like we used to, but we still honor the retreat and the woman goes off on her own.
Oh,
So there
interesting.
is still an idea culturally in some of them, but others it's just a memory.
Hmm.
The Pueblo tribes, the Plains Indians, when I went to the Pueblos to interview them, they were frightened to talk to me at first because they said the men had decided it was not okay for them to talk about their menstrual cycles or to go into a lodge anymore. So therefore, even talking about it, they could be punished by the men. So they swore me to secrecy that I wouldn't tell anybody where I got this knowledge. So
Right.
the Pueblos remain unnamed even today.
Right. Wow. So it's, and I understand that because these things are considered sacred
Yes.
understandings that are gathered for spirit for that specific person. So it may not be generally uh, um, advisable to everyone. So they probably don't want to have you, run off. It's like, this is for our people. It may not work for you, but who knows why. So there's a whole bunch of other stories in here that you have in the back. I was wondering if you can share them because I find these practices fascinating. So you talk about, can you share some of the other ones that you talked about? Because you visited a lot of different cultures and studied a lot about the cultures and the different things that people did for blood rituals. So you talked about the ones in West Central Africa. There's some in Australia. There's just so many different ways and rituals that people had. But And I don't know if you can recall by memory or the ones that, at least for you, that are kind of the ones that you think, yeah, these were the ones that I thought were the most fascinating and that you took to heart
I
and
think
said, yeah, I love them. Yeah. Can you share some
I
of
can
them?
tell you two of them that struck me most poignantly. One of them is the African ritual that when the daughter begins to bleed for the first time, the mother and grandmother or aunt, two of the women, will take her into the woods and she has to dig a hole in a cave, preferably, if they can find a cave. And then she sits over the hole in the cave and bleeds without anybody being around her. She fasts, she has water she can drink, nothing to eat, and she's supposed to be in the dark, left alone by herself while she's bleeding, so that she can get insight from spirit and know that this is a sacred time and not to be distracted by doing other tasks. So they actually take this young girl out into the woods, into a cave, into the dark, make her dig a hole or encourage her to dig a hole. And then she's expected to sit over it, and she thereby learns how to listen. So she becomes a better
Wow.
listener to her partner when she gets married or to her children. That was one that really struck me. There's
Wow.
another one that's done by the Navajo people. They have a gathering once or twice a year where all the girls who have had their first menarche are honored. So the first half of the year they do all the girls the first half of the year, and the second half they do all the girls the second half of the year. But prior to these tribal gatherings for the whole village, the young girl, when she begins to bleed, her mother paints her face with white ochre paint, and she is set outside on the stool, and she has to sit there until people notice she's sitting there. And when they notice, then she has to run a race as fast as she can with something in her mouth, back with it in her mouth to show that she's still viable, but she's carrying new knowledge, new wisdom. And she sits there, and then after she has sat there for 24 hours, the men of the tribe come around and serenade her and sing to her songs of you are grown now, you're a woman now, you have much to offer, we respect you, we honor you. That's the
Wow.
personal ceremony. And then she joins with all the other girls at the whole tribal celebration that happens twice a year. So
Wow.
those are two of my favorite stories.
Wow. Those are fascinating. Um, what strikes me about those stories, I've had a couple conversations specifically around this Me Too and like what is the root cause of and taking ownership from both parts. Like what can we do as a society to change? And the couple of ideas that I've liked the most are to really talk about relationships and sex in a fundamentally different way, and to understand that it's all rooted in love and respect. And
Yeah,
what's interesting about those two ceremonies that you just described, it's like regaling, this incredible, wonderful, beautiful thing that has happened, that this woman can now give birth, that she has this white ochre paint on her face, or that she's put in a cave because it's like you have this beautiful ancient wisdom and we're going to devote time. The whole tribe is going to recognize how wonderful and beautiful you are, and special, right? Versus our culture. In contrast, it's not like that at all. It's not about um, kind of
it's not
recognizing the
about respect.
specialness. What?
Yeah, it's not about respect.
Right.
Our culture does not respect it at all.
Yeah. And it's not about love, and it's not about appreciation, right? It's appreciation for what those, as a woman, the special qualities that you have to bring to the equation, which is, your creativity, your intuition, your ability to have these visions. Like, it's really quite beautiful. What these other cultures have done. It kind of gives us a model of how to talk to our own children about sexual relations and becoming a woman. It's really quite nice. Oops, so it looks like our connection. I'm getting. Are you still there? Okay, good. It looks like we got a weird
I'm
connection, but
here.
we're back. Okay, good. All right, so we did a couple of questions that came in. So one question was, are you saying that this whole process is a celebration of the time of the month? No, it's a celebration of the menstrual period, right? Is that what you meant? Not the time of. It's not like a. It's
It's a celebration of.
you cut out. Sorry, say that again.
I think it's a celebration. It's, I think it's a celebration of life, of
Hmm.
understanding that we can begin again in any moment. That
Mm,
all we have to do is purify those negative thoughts, those angry, unsettled emotions, whatever blood we haven't needed to use, anything that needs purifying, we have the opportunity to do that. And we
mm,
can start again over and over and over again to reach that place of divine connection, harmony, and love in all relationships,
hmm. I love it. It's a
including the relationship.
do-over. It's a do-over. Oh, I love that. I love the idea of a menstrual cycle being a do-over in your life. Okay, that's the best. That's the best
It's a good
reframing
one.
of having your menstrual cycle that I've ever heard. Okay, when you saw you went and you interviewed these ladies, and what prompted you to go into this particular topic?
Just wanting to know more about it because of my own experience. What happened with me was I set aside a certain place that I would go on my own, away from family, and I pretty much stayed there. I didn't just sleep there, I was there most of the day during my cycles, and I had these powerful dreams that were giving me
Mm,
insights, and my creativity started sparking. All these areas that I was wanting to consider all came true for me, and I thought, okay, if this worked for me, I'm sure I'm not the only woman on earth that that's happened to. So I wanted to investigate it in a
mm,
larger way in order to offer something for women across the world to remember who we are, how special we are, what we have to offer, instead of this horrific way that we've been trained to think about our biological cycles. I mean, the names that's given to it, the curse
right,
on the rag, you know, somebody's sick, all
right.
these horrible names, beautiful recognition of what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So you had experienced the benefits of going on retreat, and you thought, where is this coming from? And then you found that in fact it had indigenous roots, and that's when you started investigating all this. And when you found that out, when you thought, oh, actually, the thing that I kind of did naturally is something that they've been doing, for in these tribes forever. How did that change, or did it change, or was it just validating for you?
Well, it took a whole lifetime of trying to hide my period under a rug or trying to hide the fact that I was a female under a rug and say, no, no, I'm just as good as any boy. And recognizing that, of course, we're equal, but that doesn't mean we have to do everything the same way. We're
Mm,
equal, but we're different. And it's good to honor those differences instead of trying to hide them or cover them up. And that to me
mm,
seems keenly important for mothers to teach their daughters. It seems to
mm.
be something we need to pass down to change the societal viewpoint we have of what it means to be a woman in a patriarchal culture.
Right. So it helped you embrace your womanhood, really, versus kind of
Yeah,
hiding it or pretending it wasn't there. Or it's like, actually, I'm a woman, and there's some distinct aspects of being a woman, and I now am beginning to understand what those are. That's what I'm hearing.
yeah.
That's very cool. Okay, so here's the question. Setting a girl with her face painted and running with something in her mouth. Okay, so the question is, what kind of thing is that? So I'm not sure. I think it was when she.
Usually,
Yeah, go ahead.
usually, usually they would put an egg in her mouth. It's a symbol of fertility. So they would put an egg in her mouth, most usually.
Wow.
Sometimes it could be a fruit, but the egg was the traditional thing to use.
Wow. Okay, got it. So she would put an egg or a piece of fruit in her mouth, and she'd run around. So it's kind of like, look, I am this goddess of fertility. Look at me running around. Is that what the
Yeah.
idea was? That whole idea of chasing her
Yes.
quickly. Okay. I love this idea. Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned in your book that I can completely relate to, and that has been like it feels like for the last 6 months has been my biggest struggle, is actually making time for a retreat, to slow down. And you talk about a lot of really important things that are happening to us as a society. We have our phones, we have things binging and bonging and ringing and chiming all the time, and our electronics are kind of making us less present. And then in addition, there's this kind of an acceleration that's happened as well. It's very hard to slow down and stop. Um, you say we often claim that we are too busy to simply stop and do that. Even when we understand that we need to slow down, the demands of living often scream much louder than the soft voice of the inner wisdom that tells us to slow down or stop. nature gives women a biological opportunity to slow down and listen to their inner guidance. However, this biological urge has been culturally dismissed, while women have been programmed to put down their own needs last in order to take care of others first. Our culture compels both genders to stay busy and resist any natural inclination to periodically put other duties aside and go inward to listen. So I just had like a big underline and the yes, I agree, but what do you do to change things? So that's my question for you, because I don't know if
I
you
think
had
the
the same inclination and how you move from where you started maybe to where you are now.
I think the first thing to do to make an attempt to move out of the old way of I'm too hurried and too busy to be able to take time for myself is to recognize and value that we are important. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we certainly can't take care of all the people we love. And the first step to doing that is just slowing down long enough to breathe one whole breath in and out. People are breathing in the upper part of their chest rather than a deep belly breath because they don't even take time to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So one simple step is just simply stopping to breathe, a breath in and a breath out. That's a full cycle. And that's the recognition that every cycle is important to life.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about your journey towards moving to slowing down and retreating. Like, what was it? So if you were to track when, when you started this process already having a retreat, you got this information, you got a sense of like, hey, if I really even lean into this more, well, here's some other things that could happen. So tell me about your journey from learning this information, recognizing that it's hard to slow down, taking a breath, to then tell me about what happened afterwards
Well,
for
one
you.
key point I put in is a little bit before that, and that is when I first began this practice. The first couple of months I did it, I was in a welter of tears every month because it was, oh, am I worth this? Can I really take time away? Is it really okay for me to do this? Because I had been programmed all of my life to take care of everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an emotional switch that has to come on and a recognition that, of course, I'm worth this, and this is going to be beneficial to everybody. That's a huge hurdle for a lot of people. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody, but it was for me. So that
Mm-hmm.
was the first step. The second step is beginning to actually put myself in my own day timer, my own calendar. I need today to take a walk in nature. I need today to have lunch with a friend. I need today to slow down and take half a day off of work. Anything that we can do to start putting ourselves back into our own lives is a step towards regaining the ability to retreat when we need to. But
Mm.
we have to start with baby steps, and we have to join with others who are willing to support and help us. If you have a neighbor or a girlfriend who can watch your child while you're having your cycle for a night and give you a night off, that's a step. If you have somebody who can exchange cooking, you cook for them, they cook for you, that's another step. Anything we can do in bonding together with our sisters to make this a sacred time again is a step in the right direction.
I love that idea. So now I'm getting to the point of that you mentioned earlier, which is okay. So now I'm in menopause. I'm actually having hot flashes. So I guess I blew it. I've lost a chance for nature to automatically remind me, hey, it's time for you to do a redo. So what does one do when they're no longer actually menstruating on the same cycle? I don't know if you're in that phase now or not, but what does one do when they're
Um,
past
yes,
that? Okay, so what was that period
I'm long,
like? Sorry.
I said I'm long past that phase, but I can give you experience on it and tell you what it was for me and how it could be for others.
Yes, please do.
Um, for me, it was a crash into menopause in a way that I was grieving everything that I had missed.
Mm,
I grieved everything I hadn't said, everything I hadn't done. I was really emotionally very heightened and upset about my life because I'd spent all of my years not having a cycle where I could cleanse and process and move on as a redo every month. Instead of that, it came crashing in at menopause. It was over in 2 months for me. I didn't keep doing this for months on end. But I think that's what happens to a lot of women is because they haven't had the opportunity or even known how to do this process. They arrive at menopause and it's a way bigger deal than they intended or thought it could ever be. They start feeling empty nest syndrome. Am I valuable? Our
mm,
culture values, youth, not age. And so they start questioning, what am I worth? So menopause can be a real time of awakening to say, look at who you are and what you've achieved. Look at what you have to offer to the younger generation. Just reprogramming your thoughts about yourself is a really important thing. But also, if you haven't honored your cycles all the way through, the hormone switches are probably going to be a lot harder. They're going to be more, you'll be more aware of the physical challenges of the hot flashes and the night sweats because you haven't had a time to slow down for your whole life. So your hormones take it out on you at the end. And so if you can recognize, okay, I'm just sort of doing a little catch up now. I'll just take my sweater on and off a couple of times. You adjust to it and you're fine.
All right, so I'm actually thinking this changes my idea of hot sweats. So when I'm having a hot flash and I'm sweating, it's actually a different way of, it's the same thing as having your period and actually being able to kind of cathartically clean out. So when I think of my hot sweats, I'm like, thank God, let it go. So is that a different way of thinking about it?
That's a fantastic way of thinking about it. And I think that could help so many women. Yes,
Yeah.
good phraseology.
Oh, I didn't even realize. So it's really, that's like this equivalent trigger. You were talking about there's a hormonal trigger that happens when we have our periods. When we're young, we have our periods. The hormones switch on. I don't know if they switch on or off, but I assume the balance switches from one to the other. And when that happens, that's when we get our period. But in this case, when we have hot flashes, that same thing is happening when we're having a hot flash. Is that what's happening?
That's similar. When you're menstruating, you have the follicular phase, which is when you can become pregnant. And then you have the luteal phase where the hormones switch and you can no longer become pregnant because you're losing the lining of the womb.
Right.
When you're in menopause, it's more of an estrogen dance. Your estrogen's going up and down in a different way than it did when you were menstruating. But yes, basically it's the same thing. You're having an opportunity to sweat out what you don't need anymore. Do you know that our culture, modern culture, is the only culture that considers menopause something to medically treat?
Yeah.
Most cultures don't treat it as a disease, but we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when you said that, what instantly flashed in my head is like, oh, who needs a sweat lodge? Like you're a walking sweat lodge, basically. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Since someone wrote when can you get pregnant? I'm not sure what that means. You mean so cut back to us because we saw your question, but I'm not sure what you mean. When can you get pregnant? Unless you want us to teach us about the birds and the bees, we can, which is not I think what we're going to talk about. But okay, so
I
we
think it's just basically telling the
sorry, say it
just
again.
basically just basically telling the person that the follicular phase of the cycle of 28 days is when the egg can be you're ovulating, and that's the phrase when the egg can be fertilized. That's when you can get pregnant. After
Okay,
that phase is over, you move into the luteal phase and you cannot get pregnant.
okay. Okay, and the person said, "Is this just something that happens in life?" Right? Yes, this is something that happens for women's lives. So the question is, this is something that happens in life, right? You said there's a time that you can get pregnant. When is that? And that I think you just answered
Different
that.
for every woman.
Yeah.
It's when you're ovulating.
Right.
When you're ovulating, yes.
Right. Okay. All right. So, okay. So when now that you've actually been practicing this for a while and you have retreats, what does your retreat look like?
My retreat is gazing at the moon, looking up at the light of the moon and saying, oh, it's new moon, it's dark. That's time for me to get quiet. That's time for me to go into a silent meditation. I ask my husband, will he cook for me? Will he prepare foods for me? I want to be creative. I want to be by myself. He lovingly says, of course I will. He fixes my meals and I retreat to write or to draw or to do whatever I want to do. But I organize it with the moon. If it's full moon, the light's bright and I see the connective time to be out connecting with others. When the moon gets dark and it's a new moon, that's the time to go inward and look at the dark within myself. Look at my own shadows, see what I need to clear out. Where am I stuck? How can I grow? So I do it once a month like that.
Interesting. Wow, that's interesting. And you trace it to the light of the moon. I love that.
Yes.
That's quite lovely. And is that something that when what do Indigenous women do when they hit menopause? Did you find out, or I
I
don't know?
they moved more into the stage of teaching the younger. So they get involved with the younger women who are just learning about the power and the ceremony of having a cycle. So they really step into the role of being an honored teacher. So they're still involved, but they're doing it as a teacher role rather than from their own personal experience.
Okay, but I know when I talked to, for example, I talked to someone a while back, Lynn Cedar, I think her name was, and she was saying that that some indigenous culture view menopausal women as being the most power. That's when they're the most powerful as women because they have all this energy that's kind of surging through them, and they have this ability to use that energy in a really beautiful way. They're the most energized at that point. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Did you hear anything like that when you were? I know you were probably talking to them a longer time ago, but did you hear anything like that?
No, I think that's a modern version of trying to heal all the women who have been suppressed for so long and not allowed to have their natural ceremony or see it in a sacred way. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a way of trying to adjust by saying, look, you're more powerful now. Look what you can do. But actually, what the Indigenous women teach is that anytime a woman is in her cycle, she is in her full power. It's the most powerful time. And when you get to the elder, you take power with you because of all you've been through and all you've learned.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a Western viewpoint to say we're more powerful now. I think we're smarter now if we've paid attention and if we
Right.
listen to what can be.
Right, right. I get it. All right. So, the last thing I want to talk to you about was you talk about the imbalance of listening and talking, and I can so relate to this. It feels like the older that I've gotten, the more that people just are talking at me and not listening. What is the ailment? What we have? Because you talk about the idea of listening and going to the cave and the girl learning when she hits 13 or whenever, when she has her menstrual cycle, to learn how to listen. What is it that we don't understand about listening?
Well, two things. First of all, women have been suppressed for so long that they feel like they have to shout to be heard.
Mm,
And that's one very, very real social effect on why women don't listen so well anymore because they're busy trying to get their point across and make sure that they're heard. That's
mm,
one thing.
mm-hmm,
The other thing is cultural problem for men and women, and that's speed. We're in too big of a hurry to express our next thought, so we don't take time to listen to anybody else.
mm,
So, between the social overlay of suppressing women from not being able to speak what their hearts want to say or taking time to listen to things that are important to them, to the fact that our culture is so sped up, I mean, technology is wrecking our neurological systems. We're so sped up. Those two things prevent us from listening deeply, which is why
mm-hmm,
it's so key that we take time for retreats so we can remember to listen and how
mm-hmm,
to do it.
mm-hmm. Love it. So, any other closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts are that I wish that every man and woman who sees this interview or reads my book will take some time to do the first cycle consciously of just breathing in and breathing out. And then take that into how else can I experience cycles in my life so that I can recognize I am a part of nature.
Hmm.
That's my
I love it.
wish for every.
And I love the idea of the full moon because a man or a woman can do that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We've
Yes.
we've been talking to Pia Orlene's, and we've been talking about her book Sacred Retreat, using natural cycles to recharge your life. Thank you so much. I love these tips, and I think they're the perfect ones to bring up right as the new year starts. Right? I mean, it's talk about a redo. This is a new year. Here's some fun things to try. I think you have the research. It shows you can be more creative. You can get great dream guidance. Your intuition, and then intuition and relationships will improve by just taking some time away. I think oftentimes when I think of when I had little kids, you're just running around so quickly and having no space, having any space in your life, even like you said, sleeping apart in a different bed where your kid isn't running in the middle of the night and just sleeping through the night. Like that sleep alone would help your brain and being better, more creative, have better dreams, all of those things. So I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CJ. It's been a delight. And anyone who wants to look further into this, they can go to my website at piaorlene.com.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for a delightful time.
Thank you. And Happy New Year's, everyone. It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.